help me without any waste of time to welcome the Dean of Students at Wits University in Johannesburg, Mr. Jerome September. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Well, thank you. I hope
That,
you are too.
I'm really honored to talk to you. I'm a fan of you a lot. I must acknowledge that, sir.
That's strange, yeah.
Yes. Um, First time I saw you in first year 2021 was during the hard time of COVID. I saw you on one of the videos. So I later saw you on during towards the end of the year. So today to sit in front of you, engage with you, I feel very honored.
Yeah, and sorry that the last time I couldn't come. I do my best to be in student spaces at student events as much as I can. Um, but it does mean that my time is often not mine. In that I try to do an open door. I try to be as available as possible. But there's 41,000 students in one me, and it often makes it difficult to get around. But I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for honoring me with this platform.
I'm the one who's honored here, sir. Um, a lot of the time when I'm talking to my guests in the show, I'm interested in knowing their childhood, how they grew up. So maybe you can try to paint a
Yeah.
picture of Mr. Jerome September at the age of 5, 6, 7, 10. How you grew up.
So I'm a 70s. I was born in the 70s, 1974. And so my childhood was on a farm in the Western Cape, where I'm from, a small town called Malmesbury in the Swartland region. It's about an hour or so from Cape Town. My mother, a domestic worker. My father was a laborer on the farm. And so we lived on that farming context. So, in some senses, a very protected life because on a farm, you're far away from everything, shielded from what's happening out there in the world. But at the same time, also a tough life because of the reality of apartheid in my upbringing. And so my earliest memory of education and school was in fact an apartheid. The apartheid reality was in fact the day before going to school, um, when 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 we could no longer play with the farmers' children because we're similar age. And on the farm, initially we were just playing together, we're just kids. And then the reality hit that they were going to a different school on the other side of town. And I had to get in to go to another school on the other side of town. And just how that struck that the friend whom I thought was my friend is actually more privileged in a different space. And that was kind of the end of that friendship. Um, and so going through schooling in the 80s, I guess a big influence on my life was the 80s, the anti apartheid struggle, disrupted schooling, all of that was happening, but also on the farm and observing the changes that were taking place on the farm. And observing how my own parents were struggling and trying to make ends meet. But education was always at the center of it all because my grandmother never went to school, but my mother dropped out or was forced to leave school around grade four. Her brother, the same. And so she always wanted to be in school, and so she drilled the value of education into me from a very young age. And so reading books and all of that stuff, and it's an upbringing of the clever kid who is reading um, picture stories and all sorts of books for grandparents and the Sunday newspapers where we get it a day later, reading that for my grandparents. When letters arrive, reading, this is before email, remember?
Yes.
Reading the letters or writing back to people while other people dictate to me what I had to say. So those were like some of my childhood growing up memories.
Growing in a farm, was it a white man's farm or just a family
Yes,
farm?
yes. So it's a white owned farm. So the farm is owned by white people. The owner inherited the farm from his father, yeah, from his parents, who probably also inherited it from their parents. So it was a white, so it's a white owned farm. Um, and the black people on the farm were workers. So my family, farm workers, working the fields, working for the white man, and then the women, well, in case of my grandmother and my mother, they were the domestic workers, so cleaning the farm.
Did you learn some of the things about farming? You know how to farm growing up there?
I wouldn't say I know how to farm. So it's interesting because I never saw myself as someone who was going to spend my life on the farm. So it was always, this is my current reality. Now, I worked on the farm, so by the way, so when I matriculated, I didn't have funding. I had the results, but I didn't have the funding to go to university. And at the time, my framing wasn't around thinking and asking the university or reaching out for bursary opportunities and stuff. So while I had study offers, I didn't have funding. And so I didn't go to university. So I actually ended up working on the farm for 2 years. And so it's grape region, so the cutting of the grapes during harvesting time into those big buckets and emptying it up on the truck, that I pretty much did. The livestock, looking after the livestock, all the hard labor that you can associate with working on a farm, I did for the first 6 or so months. And then the neighboring farmer had a fruit and veg little stall on the roadside. You know, like these people who are just selling on the roadside fruit and vegetables and stuff. So they had a little setup like that. And so I ended up, because I had matric, so I ended up being transferred to go and work in the little roadside stall. And so that's where I spent about 18 months working on the side of the road, praying that cars stop so that you can make a little bit of money for the day, obviously for the farmer. And so that sort of stuff. But it was always in transition. In my mind, I never believed that I was going to spend the rest of my days on the farm. And it was a very frustrating experience because you've got good grades, you are able to go to university, but you don't have the money to go. And at the same time, you can't sit at home because it's poor. I'm the eldest of 5 kids. It's poverty at home, and you need to make a contribution towards life, and towards being there. And so I often saw that as being in transit space. And I guess this is where the value of reading comes in, because my mom was a firm believer in reading, and I read anything and everything I could get my hands on. And often it was the old newspapers or old magazines or old books or whatever. So anything I could get my hands on to read. And reading kind of transports you to a different world, and you get exposed to a different reality. And so that's often where my mind space was. It was, I'm in transition. I could do a little bit of gardening. I could do basic things I could do. And people often don't believe it, but I could do the little things, like even firewood, getting firewood from the field. So I know about cutting the wood and getting it ready for the fire, because we didn't have electricity. So it was the old firewood, the long drop toilet, you name it, all of that stuff is what I grew up on. So it was that groundedness in the reading. It was a parent in my mother who believed in education and was really pushing me. And then the other part was the church. So I got involved in the church fairly young. Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Which religion?
So I'm a Christian,
Yes.
and so it was very young age getting into the church, because the church provided a platform through which one could be, and because of Sunday school and youth, it also presented one actually with opportunities to, besides being initially a Sunday school kid, become a Sunday school teacher or be on the youth committee. And then you were able to also develop and enhance grow leadership skills, because you had to plan your lesson for Sunday with the kids or with the youth on the Friday night.
Well, when did the breakthrough happen in your life after having these 2 tumultuous years working on the farm? And now, when was the breakthrough for you to go to varsity?
It was the cliched 1994, right?
Yes.
So I had the Mandela moment, right?
Yes.
So in the so the farmer had like, so in the farm stall they eventually put this little 37 centimeter black and white TV, and so there was this TV that often we would use, and with Nelson Mandela's inauguration as president. Um, they gave me this TV because it was a working day for me, and so I was watching his inauguration on TV. And there was this moments around transition in new country, and I had just participated in the voting a couple of weeks, 2 or so weeks before that, when 27th of April on the farm in this long queue voting, and then of course watching the inauguration, and it was a moment of, and I guess this is what a lot of that time was about, that there was endless opportunity, endless opportunism, not opportunism, optimism, endless possibility. The world is my oyster. And so for me, watching that was immediately also a reminder of the change that's taking place and what it might mean for me personally. So I just started writing to places. So I had those big A4, the A4 books with a hardcover, tear out the page, cut it neatly, write on it. So to whichever university in the Western Cape. So I wrote to all of them to say, this is what I'm interested in. Can I please get the application forms? But I had foresight this time around to also indicate in the letter, if there are any bursaries or scholarships, please let me know, send me the form so that I could fill it out. So it was that time, and then I applied. So I manually applied. So this week I applied to UCT, or this month, because I need to take, I can't remember how much the application fee was, but let's say I had to take 50 Rand from my little salary this month for this application. Next month I applied to UWC, the other month to whoever. And so I applied, and then the decision I made was that whoever accepts me first with financial aid, that's where I'll go. And it so happened that the University of Cape Town accepted me first with financial aid. And so that's where I ended up going.
Talking about which university accept me first, when I was applying, I completed matric in 2019. So out of lack of knowledge, I didn't know that Wits has film and TV. So I just saw media at UJ. I applied UJ only, and UJ rejected me.
Yeah.
Now I understand UJ couldn't comprehend and contain this kind of wisdom and all this stuff. So 2020, I decided to reapply. Pretoria, UCT, UFS, Nelson Mandela, and all the universities accepted me. 4 of them accepted me. That was the last one.
Oh wow!
And I'm in East Vale. I was like, no, Joburg is same place. East Vale, just here in Springs. I was like, for me to go to UFS, I already signed everything.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, I'm changing the week that I was supposed to. So I decided to come here. So growing up in these difficult times whereby education seemed as the only way for you to come out of poverty, having these parents who are domestic workers, did this give you more drive and optimism to be somebody in the future?
Yes, absolutely. So because I knew that if I was focused on my education, and if I pursued that dream, that it was a certain way out of poverty. And I didn't necessarily, it was not about being rich or about living the soft life. It was about leaving the farm and having a comfortable life, a dignified life. And so I knew education was that key. And also because I had already at that point observed what education meant for other people. And how education transformed the lives of other people. So for me, it was either I was going to continue working on the farm and living a life of poverty, or it was going to be I pursue the education and become something.
Did you have a backup plan beside education?
No. There was no backup plan. And because remember, I had left school. I had already now spent 2 years of my life working on a farm, and the alternative was continuing that, or maybe thinking about moving to town, maybe become a petrol attendant, or work at the local factory, or whatever the case might be. Education was that key for me.
Having to spend the whole 2 years working in a farm.
Mm.
I've been to quite a few farms. I don't know the condition then, but now it's not a good place.
No.
The hostels, it's not a good place, especially as a kid is not a good place. Having to spend the whole year fresh from high school working there, um, were you at some point thinking my parents are domestic workers, maybe we're just destined to stuck here, work for these white people?
Um, I think there were times like that, but so I must say, so part of it was having read as widely and having understood the power of education. I knew I needed to find a way back to education, and so I must say I had a teacher who didn't lose hope and faith in the time that I was working on the farm. So there was this one teacher who who every now and again would check, or who would I bump into in town, and then she would check on me. How are things going? What about the stream? What about whatever? The second thing, which for me was very important, is that I was very rooted in faith. And so my faith journey and the church journey was an important one to kind of help me believe that God would open a door at some point. And I didn't understand what that door would be. But while I was on the farm for those 2 years of working on the farm, at least, I also didn't sit back and only focus on the work. So I remained active in the church. With the 94 elections coming up at the time, with this teacher, I also got involved in a number of like democracy campaigns and things, where there was a strong movement to teach people about what this new thing called democracy actually is. So voter education, and I was involved in some of that stuff. There was a night school where older people were being taught how to read and write, and I was involved in that. So I remained engaged in stuff in my small world, sure, but in my small world, I remain engaged in stuff that was happening in my world. And I think that's part of what kept me focused and what kept me sane. Because I didn't want to get stuck, even at that young age, in the hopelessness of the environment that I found myself in, because I had seen what that had done to my peers. Um, and so that stuff stayed alive. And I always had, I guess, angels along the way. So the teacher or the pastor in the church, my mother, my grandparents who believed in me. So even when I got accepted to UCT at the end of 94, I had to make this tough decision around, because I now have to resign from my job at the end of December to go to university in February. And even then, I wasn't sure how much this financial aid was, because it didn't say it's full. It just said, we're allocating financial aid to you and the details will come. And there was this internal, well, both internal and external battle around, do I take this opportunity? What if this opportunity falls flat and I've resigned job? My parents don't have money to send me to university. And so my decision to resign, irrespective of whether the details will come together or not, was in many respects a faith move. To say, my future is that way. This is not my future, and that's not my future. It's that way, and I'm doing a faith move.
Walking by faith, not by sight.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's what I believed in 100%. And I guess it's the gutsiness also of youth, right? That optimism, the can do, the I will, that it will somehow come together. Um, and so I made the move. But of course, I knew I could always go back home.
Yes. Here now you are at UCT studying, hoping that one day I will be successful, I'll be able to take care of my parents. But your parents, back to reality, they're stuck in the farms. There are things that are happening there. You know the conditions that they live in.
Mm.
Was that affecting you academically? Because I know there are students who are here today, they have personal problems at home. They know sometimes whenever they're calling their sibling, they hear stories like, we didn't eat anything today, there's no bread. Was that affecting you struggles from back at home?
Well, it did. So a couple of things happened. So the first was that I think context is important. We didn't have cell phones, so this was before cell phones. This was before the internet. This was before any of that stuff. So you had to call people on a landline, right? The old telecom landline. Otherwise, you wrote to people letters that takes a week or two to get delivered. And I think to an extent, that kind of shielded you from the immediateness of things. So even if people were to write to me in the letter, said, "Oh, we're hungry," "Oh, this," or whatever, I received the letter a week or two later, by which time a plan was probably made. So in my first year, that stuff was tough because the adjustment was really difficult. So I'm Afrikaans speaking. So I come from an all Afrikaans home environment where English was taught in Afrikaans at school for however many minutes a day, to an all English environment in Cape Town, and also a different racial dynamic where the majority of students at UCT is white. And in my race, my roommate was a white kid. And I remember that night I called home and I said to my grandma, this is not going to work out. It's a white kid and everything is English. And she said to me, you have chosen this path. I don't understand what you're going through, but you've chosen this path. But remember that I'm praying for you. I'll always pray for you.
He wasn't racist to you. He was a nice kid.
He wasn't racist towards me. We didn't get along. But that's just because we came from very different worlds. I come from a very almost conservative Christian upbringing, Afrikaans farm, very protected to an extent. And I had been working for 2 years. So it's like, who's this 18-year-old kid that I'm now sharing a room with? Because I was now turning 21. And so that was number one. Number two, he comes from a private school, very privileged background. I'm the complete opposite. I am Christian. He is not. He's just not a Christian. And so we clashed. And so the first semester was tough. And at the mid-year point, I actually asked to be moved, to be given a different roommate. And so we were able to change.
Have you seen him now?
No, I haven't seen him. And it was tough because part of it was also how this guy would and I didn't take it as race stuff, but how he would just he saw me. It was almost a level of, because I'm a second language speaker, there was the sense that I don't really belong here, and that perhaps I got admission through affirmative action. And almost institutionally there was that sense of you being done a favor that you're here, right? And he actively said to me more than once, you don't belong here, you can't even speak English, you're not gonna pass, and all of that. In my second semester, I got another roommate who was also a white guy and also privileged, also English, but to this day we are friends. In fact, I was one of the speakers at his wedding. I was the program director at his wedding. We became very close, and other people I met through him that we became very close to. So when I did graduate, I actually called that other guy to say to him, because he got excluded on academic grounds, and I actually ended up calling just to say, you know what, I've made it. But it was tough. It was tough. And so that was my first year. But so because I knew it was tough at home, I worked during my holidays. So from second year, I was, you name it, I was orientation assistant, I was a res assistant, whatever jobs were available on campus.
You needed that cash.
I needed that cash. I worked. And in my breaks, I worked. So I worked for a carpenter, and this was someone I met through the church who would build in cupboards, so kitchen cabinets and bedroom cabinets and all sorts of things. And so I was helping him during my holidays. And it got to a point where I was then able to every now and again send a few rand home. So it was that sense of responsibility that I am now finding myself in a much better place, and I'm actually standing on the shoulders of domestic workers and farm workers who was very poor and who made significant sacrifices to get me where I was. So even this 50 rand that I would receive in the letter once a month, once every second month, I knew that that was a massive sacrifice that was being made at home.
Now,
Yeah.
I understand a lot. Today whenever we see a very successful man, in terms of, we are not talking about monetary stuff, but in terms of achievement, their career wise, we admire their success. Like, oh man, the fact that this is a black man doing this, it means I can also do it. But we never get to know where they're coming from. I don't know who said it. He said, only if you knew my struggle, you will never admire my success.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's very hard for young people like us who are social media kids, influenced by social media, Instagram Live, to kind of accept and go through that and be optimistic to say one day I will do this. Then now you are a dean of students overseeing thousands and thousands, more than 30,000 if I'm not mistaken. They're in your hands. When did that happen for you to come to Wits and be able to attain that position?
Yeah. So it's 41,000 students at Wits. So again, it was a journey, and I've never said I want to one day be a dean of students. So I never had it in my mind that there's this particular role that I wanted. In fact, when I went to university, I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I went, and it was a BA law that I enrolled for, and then SRC happened. So in my second year, I became a lot more aware of also just the injustices on campus and the things that were happening on campus. And I then became an SRC member and eventually SRC president. And as I was going through my presidency and my SRC experience, I started interacting more closely with people in student affairs. So suddenly I had access to the dean of students, I had access to the student development managers and people, and I got a sense of what people were doing, and particularly the development work that they were doing. And that immediately touched something in me, because remember I said back in the day when I was on the farm, I was doing Sunday school and youth ministry, and it connected to that youth development kind of heart, I guess, that I developed at a young age. And so that meant that now career-wise, I was starting to look at opportunities to student development or youth development, that sort of thing. And so, long story short, I ended up working in student affairs at UCT, became a manager in student affairs, then got a wonderful opportunity to go to Kimberly to be the first head of student affairs at Solplaatje University. Spent 3 years in Kimberly, and then towards the end of the third year, I was beginning to think about what would be the next step for me. Because to an extent, when it's a new baby, you they hit a stage of growth where you need to let go, and you need to allow someone else to take them to the next layers. And so then I saw this deputy deanship being advertised for Wits. I thought, why not? So I applied.
When you were in Kimberly?
When I was in Kimberly as head of student affairs there. And also because I'm very much a city kid. So my time at UCT made me like a city person. And so, but of course, Wits is a great university. I had now been exposed to, and of course, this was post Fees Must Fall, so I was aware of the activism. Wits is a great university, and I wanted to be part of a great university, an established great university. So I applied for the role. Me and the Dean of Student Affairs at the time, Professor Len Kapula, who is now the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, me and her, we didn't know each other from before, but through the interview process, we just connected. And I got the job. In my first week at Wits, she said to me, "Actually, I've resigned," because she was going now to the University of Free State. She resigned. I became acting dean. And through that process, both the students that I had now met here at Wits and some of the staff began to encourage me to think about applying for the deanship. And a part of me was like, "Oh, I just arrived. I'm not sure. I've just arrived. The deanship is a massive role. I'm not sure that I'm ready for it." But I was like, actually, but at the same time, what an opportunity.
Which years?
This was 2018. And so I applied, and lo and behold, 3 months later, I was the dean. So that's really, I guess, from a technical point of view, how the opportunity came. But I think it's been a journey from particularly SRC days in the late 90s to now, 20 years later, be the dean. And it's been a number of experiences that build on that in terms of how it eventually got to that point. But I'd never said that I want this job at that university. It was more about, what do I believe part of my purpose to be? And how does whatever role kind of contribute towards that?
Coming into office in 2018, what was your vision towards the students of the university?
Well, in speaking to a lot of students, and I think, and I'm not sure to what extent this has changed, but there was a lot of stuff around Wits being a hard place, like a cold place, a hard place, and that there was a perception that, to an extent, people didn't really care to the extent that they should care. And so I set myself out to do one thing only, and I think that's still the path I'm on, and that was just to make this a more humane place. So to make it that means more student friendly, hopefully, that students need to feel and see that there is someone that's trying, that's advocating for them, that's willing to listen, that'll be honest with them. So even when I can't do something or I don't agree, that I'll be honest in that feedback or that reflection. And those were the things I wanted to do. One of the first things that hit me as a massive shocker was, in fact, student hunger. And this was just being in conversation with the SRC at the time, and it was during a lunchtime, and some SRC members had not eaten, and I thought, it's just student leaders. They see the deputy dean, they just want to score a quick meal. And in deeper questioning, I discovered that actually many of them are struggling, and many of them don't have food, and so then arranging for food for them. And of course, Wits had a food program. And so it was then about, how do we build that program? How do we make it bigger? How do we think about it becoming more sustainable? How do we think about it reaching more students? So today, we serve about 1,000 meals a day.
Through WCCO?
Through the WCCO, because it's one of the areas that reports to me. So through the WCCO, we now serve 1,000 meals. And there's about another 4,000 or so grocery packs that other students are able to get to cook for themselves.
About the grocery pack, who's sponsoring WCCO in terms of the packs, the food packs?
So the main sponsor there is Tiger Brands. So the non-perishables, most of the stuff we get from them, and then the rest of the stuff is students dropping off food. It's lecturers dropping off food, it's support staff dropping off food. So it's the generosity of people that in the main keeps the program going. But the main sponsor is WCCO. In terms of the daily meal, that is a council allocation in terms of budget. And then we're also dependent on donations and so on that people would give.
There's another program that is running. I'm sure you're facilitating it, although it has been initiated by students. The sanitary towel drive.
Yeah, yeah. So, and in fact, you should watch the space because there's a massive announcement coming in a week or two.
Yeah.
So the sanitary towels is also students. So even the food program, the gardens and so on was started by students. So it was student energy that got it going, and the university then came on board to support it. So in terms of sanitary towels, at the moment, it is also there are a number of student initiatives. Through WCCO, we try to provide where we're able to, but it's very much a donation based, and it's people's generosity that come, and there's of course there's a number of school councils, residences, and whoever who are contributing to that. But we're about to announce a partnership with a major retailer who is coming on board to assist us with sanitary products. I just can't announce yet because I must still
sign the agreement.
No. The agreements are in place, but the actual public announcement must still be agreed in terms of when and how and what. But we should announce in the next week or two, and it's a major partnership that's coming up.
No, I'm glad to hear that. One of the things that I wish, even in primary school, because there are primary school learners who are going through menstruation, primary school, high school, university. I wish like there would be a point where every learner and student who can afford to buy sanitary towels can be able to access them free of charge, because it's a serious issue that we need to attend to. So having this partnership and coming on board, I'm very, very glad to.
Yeah. But even with the partnership coming, I guess we also have to seriously think about how does it not become an isolated Wits in partnership with company X doing it, but how do we as a country think about dignity, the dignity of women? How do we push our government to think about either dropping tax on sanitary towels or giving incentives on it, or just funding the provision of sanitary towels to women in need, right? Because we cannot do it as an isolated Wits, and there are often constraints around what we can do because the reality is that our budget constraints. But how do we push our decision makers, our lawmakers, our leaders who controls the public purse? How do we push them to also come in so that it's systemic, it's countrywide, it's for every woman in need?
Yes, because like if it's a good thing that we are taking care of our sisters here at Wits, but what about the universities and colleges in rural areas and some areas where they don't have this? I was talking to Apiwe Mnyaman this other day. He told me in this platform that the university is lenient when it comes to other things compared to other universities in terms of exclusion. There's a process where you need to I think he made an example of FS7 at UJ. I don't know whether you have heard of that.
Yeah.
So he made an example of that. It was like, here you need to go some certain processes before you are excluded. So those are one of the lenient things. And the podcast that I watched, him and Prof Parking, he spoke about us being privileged of having access to toilet papers. There's some universities and races that he said he went to, there was no toilet paper. It was like, although we are crying, at some point we are privileged. And Prof Parking spoke about levels of privilege around that. So I just hope so.
So I think so two quick responses. So the first is that it is correct that we have a higher education system that is deeply unequal. So you have on the one side universities that are fairly well resourced, and we still think we don't have enough resources, but in the context are fairly well resourced, and there's a couple of universities that are fairly well resourced. Then there are other universities where it is a daily struggle. And if you just look at something as simple as generators, right? There are universities, you think about the top universities in this country, whose residences does not have generator backup. Our residences do, right? But that comes at a cost. And there was at some point when load shedding was at, I think it was stage 6, where the cost was about 100,000 Rand an hour to keep the generators going. Now we have to think very deeply around what it is that we're doing and how we do that, because we cannot sustain that indefinitely. But so that's the first thing. The second thing is we do need to come to the party to do the best we can to support our students, even if we cannot support them with all the needs that they might have. So we must give our students food support if they are hungry students, because we cannot accept that students are hungry. The second area where we probably have the biggest support program, if not the only one, is the emergency accommodation. And I know it's tough, and I know there are still students who've not been assisted. But Wits, as I'm sitting here, have 500 students in emergency beds in Braamfontein. And we must support our students. Now, 500 beds is tough in terms of what it costs us, and there are serious questions around the sustainability thereof. But a humane university must do what it can to support students. So the first protest I had as a dean of students here at Wits, I wasn't dean yet, I was still deputy dean, in 2018 was around accommodation. And we've had to say, this is a problem much bigger than us, but what can we do? We should do something. Even if it's not everything, we must do what we can. The same with the sanitary towels. Some people will say this is a government problem. It's a bigger problem than Wits. But what can we do as Wits to assist where we're able to, so that Wits is experienced as a more humane place? And that's what we must do.
Talking about, I was coming there to protest there. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to the university that they prioritize first years when it comes to accommodation. That's a great thing, because there are kids who come from the rural KZN Limpopo who are coming to Johannesburg for the first time coming to Wits. So just making sure they have a place to sleep, not wandering around the streets, it's a great thing. I say thanks to the university for that. But when it comes to high fees of accommodation, I stay in Nozwal, it's two sharing. When I talk about two sharing, I share kitchen and the shower, I have my own room. So I pay 8,000 per annum. Do you think, sir, is it fair for a student to pay 8,000 per annum?
You mean 80?
80,000 per annum. While I'm a student, I'm just waking up, going to study and all this stuff. And there is an employee who's working somewhere, staying somewhere, maybe in Captain Park or wherever around Joburg, paying the same amount, 80,000 per annum.
So two quick things. The one is that the budgets for housing is ring fenced, right? So whatever the expenses are in housing, that's what the housing budget must cover, and the driver for the housing, or the income for housing, is from the fees. We are at the moment having some serious conversations around the housing system, the services that's being provided, the setup, because I think we also accept that that's very high, that it's expensive. But it's an expense that must also be seen in the context of what is being offered for that amount, right? So if I were renting, and this is not a good example to make, but if I was renting a flat somewhere in Joburg, the 8,000 would probably only be for my place. It wouldn't include water, electricity. It wouldn't include Wi-Fi. It wouldn't include a host of things. Whereas if I stay in res, there's the security, there's the Wi-Fi, there's the water provision, there's the backup generators, there's the res life program, there's the wardens, and there's the bus service, and. And so we have to think carefully around what is it that we do, what is it that we offer, and how do we find ways of making housing more affordable? Because 8,000, especially if you don't have funding, is too high. And our residences are not commercial spaces. They are educational spaces. So how do we find ways of ensuring that they remain educational spaces, but that they become affordable? And I think the challenge is then around what that basket looks like and how we think about the financing of our residences, not just the individual res, but the whole system. Because outside of the fees component, we don't get support otherwise for the housing setup. So that's the first quick thing. The other quick thing is then around, it is absolutely important that we prioritize our first year students.
Yeah.
And so them being in res is great, but we do need to think around the support for students beyond first year and how we even there think about the off-campus spaces, the extent to which they are conducive for student stay, the extent to which they're safe, the extent to which they provide an appropriate living, learning space for our students to be in. And the housing challenge, so when we talk about the housing challenge, there are 21,000 beds accredited around Braamfontein and Parktown around the university. And the major issue is not that they aren't beds. So when we talk about housing crisis, it's not that they aren't beds. It's that students do not necessarily have the funding to access those beds. So how do we think about funding, particularly for students in their later years of study, particularly for postgraduate students, particularly for students who may lose their NSFAS for one reason or the other, or students who might lose that private bursary for one reason or the other. And so how do we think creatively around provision for them? Because that's the issue. The issue is the funding so that people are able to access the beds.
During the time of the protest this year, I always use this example. One of the NSFAS spokesperson said that we understand what students are fighting for. They say fees are high and accommodation is high, and the NSFAS funding is capped at 45,000 for accommodation. Mm. So he's like, we don't really understand why should we pay this amount of money for accommodation while there is an employee who pay 7,000 a month, and then we pay 7,000 a month, and then we pay 7,000 a month or 6,000 a month for a student. So do you think NSFAS is fair when it comes to them capping the amount? Or should the university say, okay, we should take this 45,000 that is coming from NSFAS? I'm talking about NSFAS specifically, because the average of our students come from poor background, rely on NSFAS, and this is the capped amount. Should say the university, we take this 45,000, and then we should find maybe external donors or funders to.
So I don't think so part of why our residences look the way they do and cost the way they cost is because when we build, there's a document called the Norms and Standards, which government hold us to. And that document will say, this is what a res must be like, this is the size of the rooms, this is the sort of support that should be there. And that's some of the cost drivers, right? It's the level at which the provision must be. I understand that NSFAS and government is tight on cash. But I think the challenge we're facing is that government, or NSFAS, let me just say NSFAS, wants to do a standard approach of one amount across the country, irrespective of where you're finding yourself. And it doesn't make sense, because Joburg and Cape Town and certain places are more expensive than other places. And so while the cap might be justified from a tight budget point of view, there should be a differentiated model that NSFAS should think about, where they say, because you find yourself in area X, where these are the cost drivers and these are the realities of living where this university finds itself, we will compensate for that. Because it is cheaper to live in certain parts of the country than what it is to be in other parts of the country. But the problem is that they said it's one size fits all. And so we are busy engaging donors, engaging funders, trying to get money, trying to raise funds as best as we can. But we don't have control. When I say we, the university, we don't have control over who decides to give how much for what, right? So often a donor will say, well, my interest is accounting, or my interest is law, or my interest is whatever, and I'm giving for that. And that's part of the challenge that we have, is that we're fundraising, we're doing the best we can to bring more money in, but often the money that does come in is for specific purposes.
I hear you, sir. But I agree that there should be some exceptional measures when it comes to some certain universities. In one of my conversation with Apiwe said that, and obviously it's not happening so far. During the protests, is there? I know you are part of the university senior committee. So during the protest, does the university maybe try to say, students, we understand what you're fighting for, but will be the mediator between you and the government, or is just the university just respond adamantly?
So you must understand, by the time we get to protest, there would have been a number of engagements between the university and the SRC. And sometimes it's with the vice chancellor directly, often it's with me. And I would then be the link between the rest of management and the SRC. But often it's the vice chancellor himself, other deputy vice chancellors, and we will try and find a way to see how we are able to support students. While the internal engagements take place, the external engagements also take place, either with donors or with government directly. So on the NSFAS matter, we've been saying since the middle of last year that bad idea, no, 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 no. There's been a number of meetings towards the end of last year, because part of the challenge is that the decision was also made so late, right? So we were only told, I think it was already February, that the 45,000 cap is now the rule. And so we would, on the one hand, and to this day, we're still in engagements with NSFAS, still trying to fight the 45,000 cap, still trying to change the rules or influence for the rules to be changed to what we think is the best interest of students, but we don't have control over that. The second thing is we would then engage funders to also try and find money. And often part of the money that the SRC would have fundraised, either me or the VC would have been part of those conversations to make sure that the door is opened, or that there's backup to the SRC, support to the SRC to try and raise the money. And then we would sit and say, well, what can we reasonably do? What can the university afford? What can the university assist with? How do we think about the future and what this means for the future? And so you'll see in the responses to what would be a long list of demands, in those responses, there will always be areas where we are able to assist. Good example, international students had to pay 75% upfront for their fees,
Yes.
right? The SRC came and made a compelling case and said, the world is tough, post-COVID, everyone is struggling, particularly African international students are not able to all pull this 75% together. Please, can we drop the upfront payment to 40%? We responded and said, well, actually, we accept that the world is tough. We accept that it's not easy for everyone, but international students, when they apply for a study permit to come to South Africa, they do say to government and to this country that they can afford to study here and that they have the money to study here. And when they renew their study permits, they make the same promise. They say, I can pay, I have the money. We say we do understand, and we don't think 40% we can do, but we'll move to 50%. So returning international students this year, in fact, pay 50% of the fee up front. So that's a concession. That's a real, let's try and meet you halfway, let's try and meet the need. When we, even around the accommodation, originally we had about 300 or so beds, and the SRC is the party who actually said, can we move this to 500? And we came back and we said, yes, we can. We will need to find the money somewhere, but we also believe this is a problem and we need to assist, and that's how that was moved to 500 beds. But then there were other areas where we couldn't grant concessions, and so it's always this: where are we able to assist, where are we not able to assist, and how do we continue with the conversation to find solutions?
So we always talk about the protest and the protest. The students are being protesting, students are taking the university, are vandalizing the property of the university. But after the protest, specifically this year, what are some of the victories? Maybe an amount of money that the SRC managed to raise to address the issue of fees.
And this is what gets lost when there's a protest, right? So I think the SRC raised, look, I'm speaking under correction now, but I think they raised around 6 million. So there was funding from the Motsepe Foundation, and then that was 1 million. And then there was money coming through from another donor. And then actually last year's SRC also left, I think it was about 2 million from what they had raised last year. The Vice Chancellor then matched that through his own fundraising efforts, rand for rand. So the SRC had about 10 million to be able to, this year, to be able to assist students in need. And so that, I think, is a significant one. I think that they were able to get the 50% concession for international students makes a difference to international students who now have less pressure in terms of that 75% upfront payment. I think the extra 150 or so beds that they were able to get for students who were sleeping in the labs and all sorts of spaces, I think that's making a real difference. And we need to continue in conversation to find solutions to the bigger problems that we face and to the areas where we were not able to meet each other.
Talking about students who sleep in the labs, has one of the students approached you and say, I don't have a place to sleep, I'm sleeping in the labs or in the toilet?
It happens all the time.
And how do you feel, because you are the one who's leading them?
Well, I have to, so on the one hand, we will always try and see, can a plan be made? And often the plan is linked to what the students' personal circumstances are. And here we have to also understand that not all students who sleep in the labs are necessarily homeless, right? So during exam time, often students would do cross-nighting. So a student would be, I need to study because tomorrow I have an exam. Sometimes it is because they have a test due, and and we stay because the home environment is not conducive. Sometimes it's because there's a taxi fare issue. And so you kind of zoom in on and you do your best to try and find a solution for that student. And often I cannot help immediately. Now, as a human being and as someone who works at the university, of course it breaks my heart. And of course it is something that keeps me awake at night, because how do we find a solution to that? And we'll continue exploring ways and trying to find the money to make sure that we help as many students as we possibly can. But this is where, again, partnership is important. And the partnership is around how we identify those students who are in need, and how do we work together to make sure that we find, whether it's the money or the bed or the whatever that might be, together, university with students, so that we are able to find lasting solutions to the problem.
Last year we were celebrating centenary.
Yes.
It was a very remarkable and memorial moment. Around the street was all painted with us. The university raised a big deal of money. Did the university take a chunk of it and say, we are putting it to student accommodation or to student fees, to these students who can't graduate because they owe the university, who can't be able to re-register again because they owe the university? Or just the university put the money somewhere for?
And I always find this interesting, because it's the university and the students. Almost all the money that gets raised is in the interest of students in one way or the other, right? So upgrading the planetarium is about a better educational offering that students will be able to get. And what it also means is that the soccer stadium on the one side there is going to get a facelift, including the lights are going to be better, which means a better facility for sports students and for students to use. The change of the AMIC deck name, that came with a 50 million rand donation, which is bursaries for students in the engineering faculty. The announcement that came yesterday around the 10 million US dollars, that's also funding for students. And so there's a massive activity, even from last year, around fundraising for students. But here's the trick. Most of the money is not unreserved. It is not Jerome saying to Wits, here's 100 million rand, spend it on whatever. It's often the donor coming and saying, here's the 100 million, this is to fund that one and that one and that one in terms of categories. So when we think about this year, the hardship fund was 12 million last year. It's 28 million this year, right? And so as the money come in, that's where a lot of the money is put to support as many students as we possibly can. So yes, where money came in and it was available to students, we make it available to students. We support students as best as we can. There's a massive fundraising activity happening, the centenary campaign, and part of that is around an endowment so that we get this money in, we put it in endowment, and we're able to, from the interest, fund students, student activity on campus through bursaries and so on into perpetuity. But it's a hard one because many people don't just give unreserved money. It's often towards a particular cause. And often we also have to do layers of high jump around people understanding that Wits is a stable place, understanding that there's a good management in place, that there's tight rules, tight processes in place so that people feel secure that their money is not going to be wasted or go towards other things. But do we support students? Yes. There are many graduates out there who can tell you that, which is why we often say, register for the discretionary fund, register for the discretionary fund. Because when the money do come, that's where we'll go. It's a portal it's a link on the student portal. You register. There's no guarantee of money. But when a donor comes and they don't give strict conditions, or they say for final year students, that's where we'll go to find the students so that we can fund them. And there are many students who will say to you, I had this debt, and then the next morning I woke up and someone paid the debt, and I don't know where the money came from. And that's often what happens. So there's a lot of that happening, especially in the lead up to grad season.
Or the university next year. Maybe I might not be here.
But the thing is also this. So how do I, as a student, think about my studies, my study journey, and opportunities to access possible funding, right? So there's Phoenix, which is a crowdfunding platform where students can go and they can try and raise money. For postgrad students, there's now the postgrad funding portal where students can go. And this is what I mean with this partnership. It's this joint thing. It is about how do I, as a student, access whatever opportunities there are, look for opportunities, apply for opportunities, and then partner with the university where I'm stuck or where I am, after all these efforts, not able to find. So how do we work together on this stuff? Which is why the SRC fundraising is such a beautiful initiative, because on the one hand, it's students saying, we will go out there, we will do our best to find the money, to hustle, as you guys would say, and the university coming in and saying, and we will support you on that.
Sir, I don't want to see, this is my prayer, I don't want to see next year, although it will happen, I don't want to see next year students marching around the streets, because although we are fighting for a good cause, at the end of the day, there are few who are being victims of the protest. In which way? When we are protesting, there are students who are being charged with criminal charges and whatever. They go through hearings and all the stuff. You find that at the end of the day, they end up being charged with the criminal record. They can't practice what they studied for, and their dreams now they are shattered. 2021, when we were protesting, there's a innocent man who died who was not part of the protest. We don't know what will happen next. So I really pray that next year the university may find a very good way to negotiate with the student without them having to go to the street. What is the plan of the university in terms of preventing this next year?
Well, again, it's a partnership, right? So from our side, we are busy engaging NSFAS, and we're continuously engaging NSFAS, and even through the Vice Chancellors Association, the Minister, to be able to ensure that we find solutions to the NSFAS related problems. Right? So that's the one thing. The second thing is we will look at the budgets, and we will do our best to increase where we're able to make budget provision where we are able to ensure that we support as many students as we possibly can. If we all want to support all students, but there is a real limitation on funding and what's possible. And so we will, and we are, not will, we are continuously doing the best we can, fundraising, trying to find ways of resolving the problems. And in fact, we are still in conversation with the SRC around a number of these things. So just a week ago, for example, we were in conversation, us together with the SRC, engaging NSFAS around the issues. And so we are hoping that the SRC, both current and future, will sit with us, that we will talk through what the issues are and jointly find the solutions. And where we are not able to find joint solutions, that we will perhaps pave a way through which we can say this is the process we will engage in to try and find those solutions external to ourselves. But that's our commitment.
I heard rumors saying that during the protest, the premier of Gauteng, Mr. Panyaza Lusuf, came to try and meet with the students and the management, and those I'm not sure. You are within your right to correct me. And this rumor say that the student they met with Panyaza Lusuf and the management refused to meet with.
Not true. The Vice Chancellor himself was ready to meet the Premier. There was an issue around the time of the meeting. I was, in fact, part of the delegation to meet with the Premier, but unfortunately, there was a community protest that the Premier had to rush to, and so the meeting couldn't take place. But the Vice Chancellor was open to meet with the Premier. He was open to meet with the SRC themselves, and to try and resolve the problems. He remains open to meet with the SRC, as we are, and with any other party that wants to assist us in thinking into the future and how we solve these problems permanently.
Have the university tried to call him back, contact him, set a meeting with him?
Well, the Vice Chancellor certainly has. I mean, the Vice Chancellor is in constant conversation, not just, there shouldn't be a conversation about the Premier. The reality is that higher education is a national competency. And so the Vice Chancellor is in conversation. There's engagement with the city, there's engagement with the Premier, there's engagement with the Minister, there's engagement through the Vice Chancellors Association, with NSFAS and a host of other parties to try and find solutions. So yes, we have constant conversations around a host of things.
Would you agree with me if I say that today's universities are more like a business sector more than a public institution?
It's a public institution, but there are hard realities around finances and making finances work. Because if you understand that over the last 20 years or so, real money to universities have decreased from government side, then you'll understand that increasingly universities have become dependent on parties other than government to try and fund its operations. And so if you want Wits to remain a world-class university, to remain a university that offers excellent education in excellent facilities, then there are real financial pressures on the university. And then the imperative does come to try and make the books work.
Just before my last two questions, what is the main reason for the university to call upon hippos when students are protesting?
Well, I'm not sure. There was, I don't want to go into the protest and the dynamics of the protest, because this is going to become a conversation of, but he said, she said, and management and whatever, right? The reality was that on that day, there was a security assessment made. There was a threat. And if you look at some of the charges that some of the students are facing, unfortunately, it will paint a picture. And unfortunately, it got to the point where those who knows about security made a call and asked for support. And sometimes it is also because external parties come into the campus, and it might not even be that it's our students who are doing certain things. But how do we find that balance between protecting the university or protecting students, the university, the property, the lives of people, and at the same time enabling the protest? Because protest is a constitutional right. Students have a right to protest. But there are clear rules around what is acceptable behavior and what is not. And I think there is a debate around whether what happened was acceptable behavior or not. But as a principle, we should never have the police on campus.
Yeah. Now, say I'm a good, firm believer of the principles of Martin Luther King, of nonviolent
Absolutely.
form of protest. So, in saying that, I don't really appreciate or love or support what happened on that Friday, students stoning the securities and the security stoning back to it wasn't a good thing.
Absolutely agree.
And it wasn't also a great thing for the hippos to come. I think there should be a very tight security without having to come the hippos and threaten the students. But that's a topic for another day. So, what is the main reason? Say we really want to be active, doing some great things in the institution, like maybe to build our profile for our career, or maybe to make some extra cash, because 1.6 now from NSFAS is not really enough. Food is expensive. Your cooking oil 2 liters around 9 to 95, and it's not really great. So you find that students, they have this amazing Elon Musk kind of ideas they want to implement. Then when they go to the Wits Theater, they charge them external rates. When they go to whatever space they want to use as students, right, who are attending in that university, they charge them as someone else who's a businessman coming outside. What is the main reason for that?
Well, the first thing to say is that, of course, students must be given space and opportunity to be, to have their ideas thrive. And that's why we have a number of programs that help students to think through that. So the entrepreneurship program, I mean, it's a very strong program through the DLU, where student entrepreneurs are able to be developed, where they are linked with opportunity, and where they are able to also pitch their ideas to potential funders and so on. I mean, you might know of the national competition, for example, where you can win about 100,000 rand towards your idea.
Yeah,
right?
This guy is part of it.
Yeah, so wonderful. So there's that whole entrepreneurial activity, entrepreneurship support that is taking place. And I think the important thing for students when they do have ideas, it is around what is that idea, how is it being pitched, and how do you think about how you are able to create that and to give expression to that in a context where there might be real costs. Now, I don't know what the real cost might be around the theater, right?
It's in total, it's 12,900 rand. It's 1.2 for booking the venue, and it's 1.7 to book the venue and 1.2 for maintenance fee. So why are they not charging us external? Because like find that I want to host an event, maybe I want to raise some funds for my debts, for an example. I owe the university and they charge me 12,900 rand. When am I going to get?
Well, so I don't know the detail around what the cost drivers are. It might be that from the theater point of view, there are real costs involved. And some of the real costs might be that security needs to work later that night, who would probably charge the theater. It might be that there are other staff who might need to work, and for those staff, it would be an overtime cost. So I don't know the detail around that. when I organize student events, there's a similar process around that, and it's because often there are real costs that gets passed on to the organizer. But what we do need to find is, how do we have a sense of what these events are? How do we get a sense of the activities that students want to do? And then how do me as the Dean of Students or other people in the space, how do we find ways to support students so that whatever cost there might be is not prohibitive? And so how do we support you to enable you? And the one is through the entrepreneurship enterprise, but the other might be thinking about partnership. The other might be about coming to me with the idea so that we can have a sense of what it is that you're doing. And we are then able to see, where do we cut? How do we support you? How do we help you? Because I agree with you, where students want to find these opportunities to make, whether it's money for themselves or money towards their fees, that we should help facilitate it. And that's another advertorial for the CCDU's employment portal, because there's this part-time work employment portal through the career service where students can also apply for part-time jobs.
Now, sir, just my last question. Thank you for coming here, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Sir,
for having me.
with this current economy that we have and how the system is, do you really think the future that we have, we're going to have a free education? And lastly, what is your message to every young person who's in any institution of higher learning?
So, free education is a cause that I support. The issue, I think, for many would be in a global and national economic climate. How do we make that happen? And there it's about the economic mechanics around that. But how do we make it happen? And how do we find ways as a society to say we support this cause? Now, NSFAS is meant to provide that for at least the poor, up to 350,000 family income. And so how do we make sure that NSFAS is supported, that we pass as quickly as we possibly can so that we can exit and other students can get the opportunity to come and study with that support? And what are the other mechanisms, and how do we learn from other countries around how they were able to do it in spaces where there is free education? And I think it's a goal and it's an ideal worth working towards, and it's perhaps to have a longer term view on it as opposed to the immediate, given some of the constraints that there is. But should every talented young South African be provided with an opportunity to study? Absolutely yes. Should we find the ways of making it happen? Absolutely yes. And the debate should be around the mechanics around how we make it happen. So to every person out there, every youngster, every student, every person going through higher education, and particularly Witsies, right? This is your place. You deserve to be at this university. You have come through the front door. You're not an imposter. You absolutely belong here. And I think it is therefore incumbent about yourself, understanding that everyone who's in higher education today, in a university, in higher education today, to an extent is privileged. And it's the layers of privilege, but to an extent is privileged because the majority of young people are not. And so it's incumbent upon yourself to make the best of this opportunity. So that's study hard, link into the co-curricular opportunities that's available, join a club or society or a sports club, get involved in what's happening around here, grab all the possibilities, all the opportunities that's available for you. Whether that's running a podcast, because through your podcast, you're learning skills, you're preparing yourself for a world beyond the university. You are busy putting yourself out there and people are able to see what you're about. And by the time you perhaps go and say, I want to join a major media house, when you reflect back, you can say to this media house, this is what I did. Look at my editorial work. Look at my interview skills. Look at the hard stuff that I've done just as a student. And that gives you the competitive edge over someone that has done nothing. So you are here, you deserve to be here, make the most of this time, and I know that you're going to succeed. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You've got the world as your playground. So play. Make the most of it.
Thank you, sir, for coming. We love you as student. I personally love you also. So whenever we protest, we say some stuff. We don't say specifically to you. We say to the university.
Yeah.
We say to the system.
Yeah.
So we are not fighting anyone. So,
yeah.
So, sir, thank you so much for being the leader that you are to us as student, and making sure that we benefit some of the benefits that we benefit, the food, the sanitary towels that our sisters are benefiting. And the list is endless, the bursaries and all the stuff. Thank you so much, sir. May God preserve you for a very long time, that even my children may find you.
No, no, I can't sit in the space forever. I must also at some point make space for young people to come in, for others to grow, and for others to take the space further. I love it. I love it, students. And from that, I've not had a single day of regret for being here. And that is because I think Wits has the most incredible students, are human beings. And I fully understand that when the shouting and the stuff happen, it's not Jerome the person. It's what Jerome represents. It's what perhaps it's the face of something much bigger than myself. So Wits students shouldn't feel the need to apologize, because, and I must say to you, and this is why I feel incredibly honored, is that not once have I felt disrespected. Not once have I felt that my human dignity is being stripped of me. All of our engagements, as rough as they have always been respectful and dignified. And that is what makes this place an incredible space, and that's what makes Wits students special students. So thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Can I say that? God bless you.
As I said, I'm a Christian, so yeah.
I'm a firm believer.
Firm believer myself.